earlier that the drainage unit was started in 2008. Indeed, it was not. It was started long before that in the Owen Arthur administration because of exactly these storm water and drainage and related issues. And I seem to remember that at one stage, a member of parliament, Joe Atherley, was somehow involved in the leading at the policy level of that agency, and so was Mr. Charles Yearwood, who has since gone in to the wider Water Authority, but his specialization initially, or the focus of his work, was the drainage unit. And it's very important, if we do not know the history, if we don't tell the history, that achievements can be taken from you, other people given kudos for them, or just claim them arbitrarily. And you know, it was dropped so gently and fluffily to the ground, one would not have thought, one would almost have thought that it had some substance or accuracy in it, but indeed, sir, it had none. So I want to frame that policy framework to go on to make the point that the legislation, I want to spend some time actually looking at a few features or a few provisions of the legislation. But the whole concept of roofs to reefs and addressing issues of water, stormwater, drainage, and in fact, water reuse, because we cannot look at water in isolation. We are a water scarce country, not just water stressed. Barbados is a water scarce country. The Caribbean is water scarce and water stressed. We are amongst the world's top water scarce and water stressed countries, in some instances ranking with sub-Saharan Africa. And if we are going to build our development for our people to ensure adequate supply of water and indeed build out our economy, we really have to understand how we address literally every drop of water and maximize it for social and economic use. I'm hearing about the construction, for instance, of new hotel product, new tourism product. I'm hearing about increasing tourist arrivals. You cannot do these things unless you have access to adequate water supply, first for your population, and then for those who come as visitors. So this subject is really located in a wider development argument, or in a wider conversation about development and or the importance of water to national development, and indeed to development globally. In Barbados, while people would think that our water rates are high, there are, by comparison with the international level and regional levels, they're relatively low. And we enjoy a much higher level of access, with almost the entire population having pipe-borne water and potable water at their homes. So much higher level of access and a much higher level of quality water. Government is, and I wish to stress that Honorable Senator Cummings, the leader of government business, in her opening address, really placed significant emphasis on the level of personal responsibility. And I would like to revert to that and to emphasize, to reinforce, to repeat what she said. Barbadians' government is accepting its responsibility and acting on the policy and legislative aspects of water development, water use, and stormwater management. But a corollary to wastewater and managing waste and stormwater management is rested on personal responsibility. And she emphasized, quite rightly in my opinion, that we have as Barbadians, a responsibility to consider what we do with our waste. There are restaurants and small businesses that dump their oils and waste into gutters and drains. There are people who slaughter animals and dump the offal into the gully or into drains. There are people who, when they finish with the old mattress, with all its body fluids and whatever else, drop it outside somebody's backyard. Yeah, no, sir. Just the thought of it. Just the thought of it, sir. It is graphic, sir, but really quite factual. And yes. There are those who do not even use the old bathtubs to grow some herbs or some kind of vegetable that they can make use of. They dump them somewhere, often by the side of the road where they can remain unsightly. They do the same with old fridges and old stoves. And then water collects in them, and they complain that there is an outbreak of dengue in the community. It can be traced directly back to our personal behavior. It creates then habitats for other vermin, rodents. When you look at vector-borne diseases, zoonoses, when you look at these ailments, you can see that social behavior is linked to the negatives that we see in our society. And then people will say, and what the government doing though? When really, the answer is, what are we as individuals and citizens doing in the protection of our own health, of our own lives, and of our open spaces? We do not know what chemicals are dumped in gullies or drains. When people who go to work in those spaces to clean behind those who have dumped, they are at risk. But not only are they at risk, the water system is at risk, because our water is water which seeps from the surface level into the underground and is then filtered toward the reservoirs. If dangerous chemicals are dumped, they can end up in our reservoirs. They can end up in the water system. So people who are being callous in respect of their practices and their behaviors are really putting a nation at risk. And we used to behave. We used to have, in my view, in years gone by, a higher sense of responsibility. We grew up, whether in urban or rural Barbados, seeing our foreparents, particularly our grandmothers, our grandparents, coming out, and they would clean the drain or the area in front of them. They cleaned around the house. They had a personal sense of responsibility for their surroundings and for the wider community. What the government is doing here also fits into its broader well-cleaning program. And you can see how then there is almost a tapestry, and I think that was the word used by the Honorable Senator Andwele Boyce, the entire tapestry of policy and programs fit together for the benefit and betterment of our society. I think, too, that the notion implicit now in this legislation or embedded in the legislation of road design within private developments or developments of a certain size is of particular importance. I live in a development that was privately designed, privately developed, and at 3 areas, there are 2 roads into the development. There are 3 areas where, as long as it rains, there is bad flooding in the road. That is a design problem. And very frequently, I do not think that there is the level of oversight on design techniques and the implications of the design on roadways in developments and the long-term implications of issues like drainage. I make the point that I said that I live in a development where there some areas are prone to flooding because of road design. In addition to that, sir, and I go back to the point of illegal dumping, and I think this is one of the areas that was omitted from the legislation, but has become a significant problem in terms of the blockage of gullies, the blockage of water courses, the blockage of drains and related areas. That very often on one of the roads to my house, even though it is less than a mile from the landfill, on any day one can find dead pigs, dead dogs, loads, what clearly were truckloads of coconut shells, household waste, personal garbage that clearly came in large commercial vehicles. This is not a single person who passed by and threw their personal garbage because it wasn't collected for 2 weeks out of the car window. These are commercial haulers who are being paid by householders or business enterprises to dispose of waste legally. They are taking the money, and rather than driving the additional mile or two to the landfill, depending on their point of origin, where there is no tipping fee, and materials that if the householder had left outside and called sanitation would have been picked up free of cost. And I emphasize this for the benefit of the public, members of the public who still do not seem to be aware that if you have bulky waste and you call SSA, it will be picked up free of cost. Now, I hear some people in some communities say that their garbage collectors will pick up their bulky waste, their grass and lawn cuttings, and take them away. In other communities, the garbage collectors point blank refuse to, and in other communities, they don't unless the householders give them what Bajans would call, sir, a little tra-la. What is the policy? There has to be a clear policy in relation to grass and other cuttings, because I'm putting these in here because very often householders, in the light of the uncertainty or demanded expenditure, will dump their cuttings again into drains, into gullies, into areas for disposal, not for proper disposal. I turn then, sir, and look at Section 15. Section 15 prohibits construction over drains and wells and areas for taking stormwater. And this is a useful addition to the legislation because very often people design buildings, etc., particularly in housing areas where there is a lot of additional unapproved construction, and they block wells and other drainage areas. It happens in middle income areas too, sir, so I am not, and upper middle income areas, and commercial developments. So I am not just identifying housing areas. I'm saying that property owners and property occupiers, by reason of design or expansion of their properties, are in the habit of blocking drainage wells and drainage areas and water courses as they expand their properties. So adequate policing of this needs to take place, and it may well be that we have to add to the drainage unit an inspection unit in order to ensure that there is compliance with this and related legislation. Because often we have legislation, but the lack of compliance and the lack of policing frustrates the implementation and the proper functioning of the legislation. Section 15 also speaks to a $20,000 fine for blocking of drains which are on people's land. So these are public drains on private lands where you block them. It fines people for not clearing drains on their lands. Now, I want to pause, sir, to make the point that very often, or carrot and stick methodologies for compelling behavior are common. With carrots, you offer something to induce or to catalyze the behavior that you want. With sticks, you impose a penalty, a fine, a punishment on the householders or property owners to get them to comply. The legislation has opted for the stick approach. But frankly, sir, I would have liked to see the carrot used. I would have liked to see an approach where we said to householders, when you clear drains, and this is where the inspection unit comes in, or would come in, when you adequately clear drains, when you don't block, when you clean the areas by the government drains, and you do what you're supposed to do, rather than imposing a fine for doing the wrong thing, that we will take X% off of your land tax, so that you offer a carrot rather than a stick. Because very often, people know they're not going to get caught, so they don't bother to do the right thing. And therefore, a carrot is a more effective methodology in creating the behavior that you would like to see than is the stick. And I thought that we perhaps missed an opportunity here for the use of carrots rather than sticks. I'm going for the penalty approach rather than the, what's the word I want? Thank you, rather than the incentive approach. That's exactly the word, sir. So incentives versus penalties, this is something that we ought to consider. Incentives rather than criminal fines. The legislation also allows, sir, for cost recovery by government where they are forced to expend money in situations where people block drains or have negative behavior, which creates flooding and stormwater management and drainage problems. And I think that this is a useful and good way of approaching it, because government gets the expense for the negative behavior of the private citizen, who demand that government gives them the best quality service and addresses their problems, the problems that they have created, and they don't think that they bear any responsibility, behavioral or financial, in addressing this challenge. And therefore, I'm glad to see that the legislation contemplates and provides for cost recovery where government expends money to address problems that are created by private or commercial entities. At section 16, there is provision for materials collected in that are dumped in a gully or watercourse or drainage area or drain, where that material is salvageable, to be kept at a government depot. I see for up to 28 days. So if your material, if you were storing construction material, lumber or something, because sometimes people store these things outside their house, sir, and I want to say, in relation to the people who dump and dispose, one of the bugbears for me is the wayside mechanics. I do not know how it can be good advertisement for you, for every car that ever broke down and never left your place, to be parked up outside of your house for 10 years. And more, all over private developments, all over middle income developments, all over working, all over the place. You have to navigate some maze to get. I won't carry my car by nobody who got all them old cars at that place, because it suggests to me that their rate of success really is not very high. But people go to them. People go to them, and that is a matter for them. But wayside mechanics, and we like to talk about small business, entrepreneurs, and the small black man, but there has to be some kind of acceptable behavior and standard imposed on them. Many of them are not registered, they're not paying taxes, they don't pay NIS, etc., and they create health hazards in the center of communities. And there are some places, sir, where you know the roadsides are virtually blocked by these people's enterprises. Garbage trucks cannot get through, only one lane of vehicle can pass, ambulances can't get through. A lot of them are using toxic chemicals, nauseous fumes within communities, and there are schools. There's no restraint at all. And I think that all of this really could have been brought under this legislation, and that we do need to take firm steps to address this kind of problem. I know that government has started to establish centers which small businesses can go and set up mechanic shops and all of the fridge repair and stove repair and all of those other things which tend to be done in the garage, alongside the house, in the open pasture next door, all the spray painting and bodywork men, etc., etc. Government is establishing facilities for these people, and that is to be commended, but I think that there also needs to be some kind of regulatory framework commensurate with the establishment of facilities. I was talking then about Section 16 and the fact that if you dump in a particular area and the material is salvageable, then that can be collected and kept at a depot. The legislation says for up to 28 days. You have 28 days to claim it. Now, sir, this to me presents very serious problems which legislation does not cover. The first thing is, how do you identify an owner? How is an owner to be identified? You pick up a load of lumber and I turn up and say, that's mine. How do you ascertain that it is mine or not? Well, I lost the bill. I had it out there for about 3 years now. I didn't know you was coming for it. Because you're going to hear a lot of that. So how do you establish ownership? One. Two, how do you, because I don't know that the people who do these collections are going to be trained in any way. How do you inventory what is collected, from where it is collected, and when you take it to the depot, is it stocked, packed in such a way that you can identify this was load number 43 from vehicle number C to X5 on such and such a day from such and such a place, and you do not mix that load with another load for somebody to say, well, only part of that is mine, or all belong to me, when in fact it doesn't. So this whole business of establishing ownership, storage in the depot, allowing people to claim it, etc., is going to become problematic. But more than that, you know, sir, we would see government start a project to repair a road. They start on the road going off for about 2 weeks, then the bill of hut, sir. Well, as the bill of hut, you're in trouble because it has moved from a 2-week or a monthly program, a month-long program, to a 6-month program. And if it is a 6-month program, 18 months later, the hut gonna be there, and the watchman gonna be sleeping in it when the night comes. So, sir, that is my concern here now. Sir, I know that sometimes I use humor to deliver serious points, and that people don't think that you can deliver serious points humorously. I disagree. That has become an entrenched part of our modus operandi in relation to government projects. And I'm suggesting here that when these things are stored in the depot, nobody is really going to look back at them. Are people going to start treating it as if it is government's property? who is when the depot gets full, how then, what is to happen? Because the legislation does not tell us what is to happen to those things after 28 days. Do you have another, let's say another 12 days to catalog and sell them? Do you sell them by public auction? Does the government engineer auction them? Who attaches a dollar value to the things that are collected, to the things that are in the depot, to what you're likely to get on a sale, and where does the money go if a sale takes place? No, none of this is treated to in the legislation, but I think that it is an important omission which really needs to be addressed, because I am now beginning to be fearful that these things will be collected from gullies and drains and water courses and so on, and just taken and placed in depots, or other storage facilities may even have to be built to accommodate them, and there they will remain until the second coming of Jesus, sir, because there will be no date set for getting them out of these places, or for indeed cost recovery to take place. And the legislation, so moving again, I've dealt with my concerns about Section 16, which I think in essence does have some merit, but I think it doesn't go far enough, and I've indicated it doesn't go far enough, and I have indicated. I see only Senator Lisa pick that up, and the President, but yes, doesn't go far enough. And Freudian slip. And I wanted to draw attention to those. So I'm now moving to another component of the legislation, which is that the legislation, and I'm glad to see this, provides persons who are adversely affected by government's actions with a right of remedy, with a right of compensation, and with the opportunity to go to arbitration if they are not entirely satisfied. So when these things are seized, not only can they be taken, and I think they clearly have to be cataloged and valued, and I don't see that in the legislation, but it is very, very critical, or you're going to have serious disputes with members of the public over what was collected, quantity and value, and in this case, where government damages somebody's property in trying to clear a water course or a drainage area or a storm drain or anything of that sort, they must compensate the individual. And like I said, they have a right of recourse, and they can go to arbitration if they are not satisfied. Mr. President, I know that you've signaled me that I have about 2 minutes left. And in that case, I come to closure by saying I think that this is really a very good, necessary piece of legislation, which I'm happy to support. I would like to think that in a future iteration, some of the elements to which I have just spoken will be included, because in my view, they are important, or they were significant, they are important, and there were significant omissions. I think that we have here provided in relation to for addressing threats to health, threats to potable water, threats to crops, threats to land, threats to those who attempt to do removal, that the legislation addresses all of those things, for which I'm grateful. I think, however, sir, that we need to contemplate this in the context of a national water use and water management policy, for which I am calling. We cannot be a water scarce or water stressed country without really considering every drop of water, from roof, from falling to flow to final resting place. And in that regard, our national water use a management policy will not only deal with stormwater, but potable water, the storage of water, water reuse, the fact that every citizen really should have a tank on every single house in Barbados, irrespective of the kind of house, chattel or of concrete construction, and that this water, a national water policy and plan really would serve us in good stead in this era of the Anthropocene and its impact with regard to climate change. With that, sir, I close my remarks and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Senator Thompson. Senator the Honorable Lyndall Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shan't be very long, but I thought I should lend my voice to this debate because I think it's a very important piece of legislation. And I think we all, from listening to all of the speeches today, it is obviously one that all the speakers seem committed to support. And this is important because we are debating storm water management or flood. I believe it's flood stormwater management, but yet. You know, we know Barbados as a very water scarce country. And so there's, in a way, a little paradox here that we have to talk about managing our flood water, but yet we don't even have that capacity to be able to adequately supply our needs for potable water, and so on. So, to me, when we talk about management, this stormwater management, we must see it in the context of not only managing floods, but also our overall water, which must be available for us to use in our daily living. And so I see this whole issue of management, not only to include the fact that we need to improve our drainage systems, not only the fact that we need to be able to have infrastructure in place to be able to handle a certain volumes of storm waters when they happen. But I see it as being important in terms of making sure that we also put measures in place to be able to capture as much of this storm water as possible for use. And not only that, but be able to manage that water such that we look at the other issues which affect the waters collected. For example, we know that when you have runoff from the fields and so on, chemicals are collected in the water and so on, and that in itself can go towards contaminating our water supply system. So to me, it has to be an overall holistic and integrated system. Now, some of these issues relating to, of course, management of chemicals and pesticides and so on will probably be located in other acts, maybe under agriculture or whatever. But the point is that we need to be able to recognize that these are all issues which need to be mitigated as well, and which form a very important part of the overall management of the systems. And so the legislation is timed. Actually, when I looked when I was reading through the legislation, it struck me that, this is really a new piece of legislation. And it's only when I got to the end and under repeal, I recognized that there was something, there was a flood. I believe it's called the Prevention of Floods Act. There was something there before. And when I started to look at to see what that Prevention of Floods Act was all about, it turns out that it was a piece of legislation that was in place probably like 50 or 60 years ago. And while, the little amendments would have been made to that legislation from time to time, it really was not, we have legislation which really is not right now suitable for the type of development, for the type of issues relating to climate change and so on, which would be necessary in this day and age. So in that regard, it is timely. And I congratulate the ministry. I believe it's the Ministry of Communications and Works that will probably be will probably be overseeing this legislation. So I congratulate all of the persons in that ministry who would have worked in terms of bringing this bill into the modern world. And, I've heard some comments during the course of the day about, for example, some of the fines which can be chargeable for infractions of this legislation. And I really have nothing against the size of the fines, because I think it is time that we, as Barbadians, recognize that things like indiscriminate dumping, people we know who still go and in the dead of the night quite happy to dump the garbage, and I think Senator Thompson made the point about the old beds and the fridges and whatever else into the gullies, and continue to create great harm for everyone. And so I have no difficulty with the level of fines, and in fact, as far as I'm concerned, they could have been higher. Because we have to get our Barbadian communities out of these habits that seem to have been cultivated over time. And we have to recognize that this country is for all of us, and we all have to play a part in making sure that we protect it. And so in this regard, I am also happy to see that the legislation has brought to the fore and put some onus on individuals as well as business and commercial properties to making sure that drainage, which is on their properties, recognize that they have an onus to be able to make sure that it is, those drainage systems are kept clean and tidy. The only thing I would say is that sometimes the government, the ministry will come along and they will sink a well on someone's, I guess there's some arrangement or something on someone's property. So they could end up now with themselves, government having put in the system, but then under the law, then they are required to keep it clean. Unless, of course, there's some compulsory acquisition or something that takes part. But other than that, I see, for example, that I would have suggested that what could have been done is that, for example, if there's an onus on the landowner to make sure that that drainage system is properly maintained, perhaps there could be some tax relief, let's say, where you could, like, for example, in your house, where you could claim insurance, or you could claim some level of maintenance, for example, to make on your tax. Perhaps this could have been something which you can claim for, and so you help to encourage landowners with these systems to be able to, make sure that they are kept clean, as is the intention of the legislation. But I go further. It's not only the private and enterprises and individuals, but government itself has a responsibility to see that this maintenance of the system is in place. Because, and I see in the bill that it says the state is subject to this act. So when we see, for example, on a day-to-day basis that the ministry or the drainage division or whoever is cleaning drains, and they take all the garbage and the stuff out and they dump it on the side of the road, and it's left there for 2 or 3 weeks before it is collected, that creates another issue, because if you have in the interim another flood or some rain or something which comes out and it washes a lot of the material right back into the drain, and so you're back at square one. And so I'm saying that part of this management, which I am stressing on, must see that when you clean drains, that the debris is removed in a timely manner. I see, for example, you see people, we still have persons along the streets who weed the streets. They weed and they go along and they pile up the cuttings and so on in little piles as they go along. Again, sometimes they are left for days or weeks before some other part of the ministry who is responsible for the collection comes along to clean it. And in the interim, again, you can have a situation where what has just been cleaned up can find itself back in the water. In fact, sometimes, and I can speak to this because I've had it in my street, where, a couple of weeks ago we had people weeding and then they suddenly disappeared. All of the debris is still there. And of course the rains are now coming in, and, so what I'm saying is management of all of these, of these issues must see to it that government is also doing what is necessary, not only in terms as a regulator, but where in the case of the various ministries responsible for doing whatever, I don't know if it's the Ministry of the Environment or whoever, but that what they're doing is done in an efficient and timely manner. And so, Mr. President, I just want to also make the point that in the case of designation of flood zones. Perhaps the chief technical officer who advises the minister, I think one of the things that should be an integral part of that system is having consultations. You know, these days we call them town halls or whatever. But having consultations with the local people in the community. Because very often, the technocrats go in and they design systems, probably without necessarily consulting the local people who have the local knowledge of what the issues are, where the flood waters are emanating from, and where they're accumulating and so on. And then you go and put in systems which are inefficient or ineffective in terms of solving the issues which you tend to, which you intended to solve in the first place. And so I would suggest that that level of consultation using that local knowledge would be useful in terms of making sure that we are more effective in placing our drainage systems over the various communities. And so I want to commend this legislation. I certainly support it. And I wish that the communication, the level of communication would be such as that we will be able to sensitize our various communities of the importance of this legislation, and that we can get all of Barbados to be involved in solving these issues. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Cummings, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to begin my wrap-up of this particular measure by expressing appreciation to all of the honourable senators who have spoken on the resolution, and to attempt just for a few moments to respond to as many of the queries that were raised as I can. Now, I want to perhaps open my comments by making the point that I am not an engineer. I don't know that any of us in this room are engineers, so I'm not going to get into the business of attempting to respond to how the Mill and Pave program can pave roads and how it should be done and what should not be done in terms of the gradient. But I can tell you that the technical officers who are engineers and design engineers in particular in the Ministry of Transport and Works, I will make sure that I will share with my colleague minister the recommendations or some of the concerns that have been raised in terms of the gradient, and then they can provide appropriate responses based on technical guidance and technical expertise. And the additional measure issue that was raised specifically about the drainage systems being put back in once the grills are done in the center of the road, I will pass those on to the Honourable Minister. Equally so, the question of resilience, and I want to appreciate the Honourable Senator who spoke about the issue of resilience being a part of the conversation, because that is very much a part of the government's agenda overall, and most certainly when we're talking about issues that are climate related, we are very much talking about in building resilience and reducing vulnerability in our planning processes. The well cleaning program that was mentioned earlier about attempting to make sure that it was effective, there has been an active well cleaning program, certainly across the government infrastructure, government institutions, and there has been a call for, in particular, private plantation landowners to take responsibility in collaboration with the inspectors for cleaning the wells that are on their property, in particular, those that are in low-lying areas or in flood-prone areas, or even in those areas as mentioned in St. John, and I certainly am one of the persons affected by what happens at Bowmanston and St. John when it rains. We want to be able to see the engagement, we expect that cleaning of plantations by private landowners would also be taking place specific to wells. On Cuscus Grass, Senator King did respond because there is a program under the Ministry of Environment that has been rolled out. And there is also a program for gullies also under the Ministry of Environment for the cleaning of gullies, and they have already commenced in advance of the hurricane season, the clearing of gullies, the clearing of culverts, certainly across St. George. You can see sometimes the big heavy excavating equipment clearing areas that people have built obstructionist structures in the pathway of the waterways, and the gullies are being cleared by the Ministry of Transport and Works. Now, there was a query raised, I believe it was by Senator Maynard, about the differential between the fines for persons who are working on the job and are being obstructed in the course of doing their duties, and those persons who are constructing illegal infrastructure in waterways and so on. No, we travel all the time, and there is a no tolerance policy. You can do all kinds of things and you will have a penalty associated with it, but there is a no tolerance policy for interfering with a person who, in the exercise of their duties and responsibilities, you cause them harm. The difference between what people do in terms of infrastructure and how they treat individuals and professionals and workers on the job in the course of their duty is by definition a human capital matter, a worker protection matter, and so therefore people have to be guaranteed safety at work. They cannot be obstructed, assaulted, interfered with in the course of the execution of their duties, and so that is the rationale I would expect for prioritizing that. In addition to the comments that I've referred to so far, I want to thank Senator Boyce for his comments, which incorporated issues relating to the Bridgetown Initiative, climate financing, the debt swap. Those are the issues that are all wrapped up in what we have described, and certainly in my opening comments, a suite of interventions, which I spoke about as policy, human capacity, investment in infrastructure, and now legislative reform. I believe I'd given a comprehensive overview of the original 1951 Prevention of Floods Act. I went into in great detail the amendments that were made, the last major amendments to the Prevention of Floods Act in 1998, and the previous major amendments to the Prevention of Floods Act in 1996. I did so in my opening comments, and I believe that Senator Nurse may have missed that comprehensive outline of the previous legislation and the rationale for this new and more expansive and more inclusive legislation. So with those few words, Mr. President, I want to thank all of the honorable senators who have spoken on this legislation, and I want to express appreciation also on behalf of the Ministry of Transport and Works for your support for the legislation. And Senator Thompson, certainly I hope that the public of Barbados has heard your and my recommendations and our pleas to the public of Barbados on the issue of dumping indiscriminately and the impact it has on our drainage infrastructure. And you have taken it even further away from flooding and drainage infrastructure to speak about the fact that we sometimes self-create some of the issues around mosquito-borne illnesses and some of the discomfort that we are experiencing in our communities. And of course, to end, Mr. President, on the balance of rights and responsibilities, the government can make the investment in crafting policies, as we have done. The government can make the investment in investing in infrastructure, as we have done and are doing. The government can legislate, as we have done and we are doing. But there has to be a concomitant responsibility taken on average citizens, Barbadians like me and like you, to ensure that we keep our surroundings clean, that we comply with the provisions of the law, that we do not allow our own personal activities to be done illegally, and then those activities become a bother and a nuisance to the community and an expense on the government. And so therefore, I am urging the public, when they hear these comments that we are making today in the Senate, that they understand that as the government tries to work with the public, that we are really calling on the public to work hand in hand with each other and with the government. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill is now read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. The question is, that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chairman, permission to call the clauses in parts, please.
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 through 4.
Madam Deputy Chairman, I beg to move that the sections Part 1, sections 1 through 4 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 1, sections 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 through to 11.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 11 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 11 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 12 through 16.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 12 through 16 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 12 through 16 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 17 and 18.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 17 and 18 do now stand part.
Question is that Part 4, clauses 17 and 18 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 19 through to 22.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 19 through 22 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 19 through 22 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 23 through to 28.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 23 to 28 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 23 to 28 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 29 to 36.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 29 through 36 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 29 through 36 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the pass of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I'd like to move this bill now be read a third time.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Stormwater Management Act of 2025.
The question is that this bill do no pass and be cited as the Storm Management Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, order number 9. In the name of the Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Insurance Amendment Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is a short bill, but it is intended to treat to the matters of regulation of the insurance sector. You have before you, it is at order number 9 on the order paper. It is an act that was debated in the other place about 2+ weeks ago. And this particular bill is meant to make some amendments to the way in which the institution we know as the Financial Services Commission treats to the insurance sector. The Act, in its introduction, it calls itself an Act to amend the Insurance Act, Cap 310, to enhance statutory fund enhancements and to make provision for a risk-based capital and insolvency regime. And it makes a number of amendments in several sections of the legislation. Section 1 obviously is being changed as an amendment. It is an amendment at Section 12 of the legislation where you are deleting paragraph B, substituting it with the following language, which reads, "A company is insolvent in terms determined by the Commission." And you are also making a further amendment by deleting and replacing the paragraph which reads, the company has established and maintained a statutory fund in the manner determined by the Commission. The next amendment is in Section 15. The following one is in Section 25, and they speak specifically with the establishment and maintenance of statutory funds by way of legislation. And then it goes into specifics where you're talking about dividend, impairing capital, the margin of insolvency. Now, Mr. President, this is what the legislation in terms of the amendments will treat to, but I want to get into the why and the what in my presentation. Mr. President, I remember some time ago, I believe in the first year that I joined the Ministry of Energy and Business, there was an Office of Insolvency, public insolvency, that at the time sat under the Ministry of Energy and Business. And the supervisor of insolvency reported into that ministry. Since then, Mr. President, a decision was made to anchor the work of the Office of the Supervisor of Insolvency in the Ministry of Finance, largely because the supervisory institutions that govern the way in which that office ran really were best vested in the Ministry of Finance. Matters relating to how capital structures and capital markets were managed, matters relating to fiscal affairs more broadly, fell within the remit of the Ministry of Finance, and specifically as it relates to this piece of legislation, the functioning of the Financial Services Commission fell under the Ministry of Finance. And so matters covered in this piece of legislation as amended here will fall under the remit of the FSC, as I will call it going forward, but the Financial Services Commission is the long term. Now, there are 3 things that we're attempting to treat with here in this legislation. One, The first and the principal action that is attempted by this legislation is to transition into a risk-based management system. And so the insurance amendment before you is to allow for the insurance sector to be in a position where it moves from functioning in a static way, in a way that then becomes more intuitive. I am certain, Mr. President, that if I were to say to the average small business in this country that the same rules and regulations governing large multi-million-dollar corporations are also as applicable to them in all the same ways, that they would say, but it is too onerous. It doesn't make any sense. But I don't have all of the resources that big companies have to be able to do some of the things that they do. And so it is important for us not to have a one-size-fits-all approach as it relates to business generically. And that's no different than in insurance. What is being proposed in a risk-based system is a different model that allows for the Financial Services Commission, specifically, to then start first and foremost under a risk-based management system with risk identification. Identify what the risks are of a given action and a given activity. Risk assessment then becomes the second step, assessing what to do about the initial risk that you have identified. Risk control measures, then looking at how you are going to mitigate against those risks. And then fourthly and finally, looking at ensuring that continuous monitoring and review is taking place that would allow for the specific risk that was identified in the first place, because as is the nature of business, and in the case insurance of this legislation, things do not remain the same all the time. And so the FSC is proposing now to move into this risk-based supervised supervision, which will allow for a number of considerations. First, what is the nature of the insurer's business? What are you into? What are the risks arising from that business? Remember, I did start out by saying that there are four main areas that we will be looking at, Mr. President, and the first one looks at risk identification. So the first thing is, what's your business? What are you doing? What are the risks from that business? What are the steps taken by you, the insurer, to mitigate those risks? What is the likelihood of risk being realized despite that? So despite your best efforts, despite your investment in infrastructure, despite your investment in policy and monitoring, despite your investment in capital and supervisory support, what are the risks that you are likely to still face? And then finally, what is the potential impact if the worst case scenario happens? And that's really where the risk-based management system is going. The current legislation, CAP 310, in its current form, does not provide for a risk-based management system. It doesn't cover that. It is a static piece of legislation that attempts to have a one-size-fits-all approach, and it treats to the work of the Financial Services Commission in a way that does not allow it to be as responsive to the dynamism of the financial services sector, specifically the insurance sector. As it relates then to the second component, which is statutory funds, it has a number of limitations, and those limitations are that it has prescriptive requirements for statutory funds, which include very specific and detailed restrictions. It talks about the kinds of asset types in which statutory funds may be invested. It talks about the jurisdictions or territories from which some assets may originate, and it sets criteria for individual types of assets. Now, what the FSC, through the Ministry of Finance and through this legislation in turn, is attempting to do is to collide now with where the international community has gone and where industry has gone globally in this regard. Mr. President, you sit in another space, particularly as it relates to the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. And together with your office, the Office of the Attorney General, the Ministry of Finance, and my own ministry, responsible for business, we deal with the OECD, the Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, and risk-based mitigation and risk-based management are all inbuilt into all of these processes. There is a sense of attempting to get in front of many of these issues to prevent use of crime, to prevent the illicit transfer of the proceeds of crime, to prevent money laundering, to prevent terrorism, to prevent all kinds of financial related crimes by using a risk-based system. And so that is where this legislation equally positions the Financial Services Commission. Now, if I were to go into what the recommendations are globally, the FATF itself has encouraged countries to move well beyond what they describe as a tick box approach. And so what they have urged is that in monitoring the private sector's efforts to address these issues of financial services, that it is important that supervisors then address the full spectrum of risks and focus the resources in institutions where risks are highest. And so that is what the legislation is hoping to be able to introduce as part of a regulatory reform for the risk-based system approach in the financial services sector under the management of the Financial Services Commission. Now, when I was preparing for this debate and we started to look at what the international community was saying and what the industrial associations were saying, across the board, there was a general consensus that RBS, risk-based supervisory management, is a forward-looking approach and tends to be far more flexible, far more intuitive, and makes the industry far more dynamic because you're able to respond to risks as they change. We, Mr. President, for example, had a scenario where we have been dealing with different types of risks at different times in the country. And what I mean when I say different types of risks at different times in the country, Mr. President, at different times, once upon a time, you have thought we had to deal with hurricanes, once upon a time. Now, we're dealing with more intense hurricanes or faster hurricanes. That's a different kind of risk that you have to mitigate for. Once upon a time, you didn't account for storm surge from a hurricane you didn't have. You had to mitigate for that. Once upon a time, who would have thought that you had to mitigate for the risk of a volcano, which you don't have? And so risk has evolved, and risk assessments have evolved, and you have to be in a position to ensure for those risks and to look at the capital base of a given institution, given in this instance, a given insurance company, to be able to protect the industry moving forward. So the proposed amendments are meant to bring the Commission's regulatory framework in alignment with internationally accepted standards and best practices for supervision. This is against the backbone of Barbados' own regulatory framework, and we're being assessed for that framework, as I've mentioned, in multiple fora and also at the industry level, and the changes are needed to allow for the industry and the FSC to address the evolving economic conditions facing the insurance industry quickly, efficiently, and flexibly. In closing, Mr. President, because I don't want to, as I said at the beginning of my comments before I went into the legislation, this is a short amendment, but certainly in the international business space, Barbados remains one of the top jurisdictions in the world, in particular for captive insurance, for the captive insurance industry. There's a broad insurance industry, yes, but within the insurance segment, there is a subsector, which is captives. Barbados remains one of the top countries in the top 10 in the world for captives. And if we are to keep the existing business that we have, if we are to attract new business into the jurisdiction, and in so doing, attract corporation taxes, which then have a run-on effect and a benefit directly to Barbadians, because it is the accumulation of businesses function in Barbados. It is the attraction of businesses coming to domicile in Barbados, businesses paying taxes in Barbados, in particular corporation taxes, high net worth companies like these ones, that then allow the government to be able to earn the revenue to invest in social services, to invest in education, to invest in healthcare, to invest, Mr. President, in people. And so changing and updating and reforming our regulatory regime in a way that allows Barbados then to be an attractive jurisdiction to the insurance industry, including, but not limited to, the captive insurance industry is a part of the development priority for Barbados, the development trajectory of Barbados, and it is on this basis that these amendments to bring Barbados into alignment with international best practice standards and the fluidity of those standards, that this legislation is before this honourable chamber. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Any speaker? Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few comments as well on these amendments to the Insurance Act, Cap 310. Interestingly enough, the leader of government business focused more on the international business side of the Act and the implications of strengthening our regulation in Barbados. But I think it also has implications on how we do business here as regular citizens, because we have insurance policies, we invest in insurance instruments, etc. And we should be protected as well as it relates to stronger regulation, and so that our investments, our funds that we put in to these insurance companies are well protected and have adequate oversight. So again, like the previous bill, there's no disagreement with what is being proposed in the amendments. Just a few questions and concerns that I will raise on some of the amendments in the bill. On the question of actuarial certification signed off annually by an independent actuary, I would believe that it would be better served to have a stronger independent overview, and maybe that actuarial review sits in the walls of the Financial Services Commission themselves. I know that the whole actuarial post or professional position, they're limited. There are few of those persons are actuaries, and there are few companies that indulge in the business of actuarial reviews, etc. And so you might have a situation where they are certifying clients of theirs, and as it relates to solvency, they're certifying the actual client. So you might want to have that independent overview so that the in-house actuary at the Financial Services Commission can do that work, and that the commission itself can feel well satisfied that it has covered all bases in the best interests of the investors or of the public at large. So that's just one of the areas I think that we need to look at. Notwithstanding that this might be covered, I think it is also important to raise the relationship between local insurance companies operating locally and their parent, and what then is the relationship between the Financial Services Commission and the other regulatory bodies as it relates to this insolvency or solvency oversight. Because you know that once the parent calls down for funds, it's very hard for the sub not to say, no, you cannot get it. Yes, so I think that these are all critical questions of what is the relationship then between the other regulatory bodies outside of Barbados, where the parent is domiciled in those countries. And I think that needs to be addressed, even if it can be included at some point in time in the legislation, to give comfort, because again, you know the history of what's happened years ago in the insurance sector. And if you want to strengthen and alleviate those things that happened previously, you want to ensure that you're covering all bases. Mr. President, in relation to the establishment and maintenance of the guidelines in Section 25, I assume then that the guidelines will be published or has been shared already. So that's just a question. I'm sure that you won't want the guidelines to actually follow months after, and then the insurance companies are kind of in a limbo or in an old state of mind as relates to what actions they may take. So we want to make sure those guidelines are discussed, shared, finalized, are presented to the industry in a very timely manner. But more interestingly is it's the regulation or strengthening the regulations are good. But what happens if a company is deemed to be insolvent? And I think that we need to understand what is the process or what will be the process for that. Because you have a whole issue of signing off and certification of actuary on the insolvency or how insolvent a company is. But what if we are going into insolvency? What if all indications are saying that this company is at risk? What are the actions that would be taken then by the Financial Service Commission to notify, if they have to do the clients of the insurance company? Is there a process where you may have a green light, where everything is solvent, business as usual, let's get in a forecast environment? Do you have an orange light where things might not be looking so good and that there are questions and things that need to be addressed? And then there's a red light. There could be where you are insolvent. So there could be a process that incorporates all of that and that actually shares with the public, with the investors, what is happening in the landscape of this insurance company. It seems might seem a little far-fetched, but really and truly, we're dealing with millions of dollars that are invested by every persons doing business every day with these insurance companies. So we have the right to know when funds become at risk. Should we slow down our investments? Should we try to withdraw our investments? Or what is the action then of the insurance company to kind of mitigate on those risks that have been identified during the review and the regulatory process and certifications of insolvency, et cetera. So I think the public needs to be clear of what steps will be taken as relates to public notice and as relates to actions that will be enforced by the companies themselves that are going through the process. So again, I think strengthening the regulations, giving adequate protection to consumers, to clients, to investors, I think that is all well and good, but there's just a few things that we need to look at with this legislation from a consumer side perspective. I guess we look at additional investment, we look at being compliant internationally so we can attract more international business. There's some real realities on the ground that we should not ignore as it relates to the amount of money that Bajans alone are investing in these companies and the amount of profits that they are making on an annual basis. And when you take into consideration the cost of insurance in Barbados, it is a great concern because the insurance is so high, persons are crying out. Some persons are not covered with certain aspects, certain levels or categories of insurance because of the cost to do so is prohibitive. But yet you see that these companies are actually reaping millions of dollars in profit annually as well. So no issues there. But Mr. President, this also allows me the opportunity to widen the discussion here a little more as it relates to insurance generally. And as was said in the previous debate earlier today, we're talking about just a couple of days into the hurricane season. And July 1st would mark a year now that we had Hurricane Beryl, which devastated the local fishing community. And when we talk about government's responsibility, we have to discuss the whole notion of their response to Hurricane Beryl and its impact on the fishing industry. And not from the position of what was offered in terms of $300, $600, whether 3 months or 6 months of support, which we know was inadequate, especially when compared to previous commitments, especially during COVID, for example, compared to the almost $300 million that large hoteliers in Barbados had access to. I don't think that the fisher folk and those in the fishing industry, the local fishing industry, got access to even 15% of that kind of money, and all being taxpayers' money. And up to today, Mr. President, I don't think there is a clear report on how much money has been used from that $300 million, and what is the repayment schedule, because the money was supposed to be repaid out of the BEST program, was supposed to be repaid to the taxpayers of this country. But there's been no such thorough report on how that $300 million has been spent. But suffice to say, we are a year on, and yet, from what I've read in the press and seen in the media, in different aspects of the media, we have seen that we are still not in a state of readiness for another hurricane season, and especially when it relates to the fisher folk. There's been no large-scale work at the fishing facilities across the island to mitigate against the natural disasters. The fuel docks are not fully repaired. The breakwater project is still ongoing, and I think about 25% or so of the boats are still in disrepair. What additional steps have been taken, Mr. President, to prepare our fisher folk for this hurricane season? How do we get those vessels out of the sea in a safe place if we were to be faced with another natural disaster? What is the plan? And I think that this is where the government, they always come to the chamber and say that the citizens of the country have to bear responsibility, and we agree. But the government also has to take a share of responsibility. So where is the planning and where is the mitigation now that we're in another hurricane season, a year after such a devastating event that pretty much cleaned out a whole industry? So those are some critical questions that if the government feels to answer, they can respond, but it is clear that there has not been adequate progress. There has not been adequate progress in many areas as it relates to preparedness. The fisher folk are still underinsured. So the government has not really gotten in between of the parties involved to help determine and help drive down the insurance rates or come up with a package that is sustainable for the fisher folk. Right? So, Mr. President, this is just the realities. I am hearing the murmurs, but these, if you go to the fishing depots, if you go, they will say the same thing, right? So I'm saying, Mr. President, that the government has to play a key role. It cannot absent itself from participating in coming to a conclusion to help negotiating on behalf of a vulnerable group who does not have the financial resources or the might to negotiate otherwise. Mr. President, in addition to some of the other issues in the fishing industry, I mean, like, why do we always hear that there is no ice available for our fisher folk? Something as simple as an ice machine.
Senator Wallace, I gave you lots of latitude, but I don't think the insurance bill covers the ice. That would be too much of a, it'd be a little risky for the insurance to cover ice. You may want to haul in your boat a bit.
Thank you, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, we're out insuring the boats, and the contents of the boats, you know, they won't have anything to sell at the market, right? But, so it is a crucial aspect of the operation, right? And when I get your point, I just raised it not to dwell on it, but just to show that there are some small things that can be fixed, but they keep dragging on, and they can be fixed with just the right amount of investment and the right amount of care and attention from the government. But, Mr. President, resilience has been touted by this government over the last 7 years, and the rising insurance costs has been identified as a threat to our competitiveness in Barbados. That is the government's position, and it is a reality. And to respond to this, in recent time, the government has introduced the Resilience and Regeneration Fund. And there are still some questions around, I guess, the legality of it, being that I think we were told that it will replace the catastrophe fund, but I don't think there's legislation yet governing the actual fund and the management of the fund. I saw also persons questioning if the National Insurance could take in these funds on behalf of the Resilience and Regeneration Fund as well. But apart from that, there's a whole lot of questions about the accountability and the management of this fund, because the government has identified that the Resilience and Regeneration Fund will be financed by three main sources. A percentage of the nominal GDP annually will go into that fund. They will be using money from accounts held, dormant accounts held at the central bank. And then there will also be a new tax, which will be pretty much the Resilience and Regeneration Levy, if you can call it that. But National Insurance is charged with managing the resources that are placed into the fund. Government is promising to put a percentage of its annual nominal GDP into the fund every year. Government also promised to recapitalize the National Insurance Unemployment Fund of $180 million after COVID. We were told, I think in 2021, about a $50 million injection, and I don't think we were told about any other such injection into the National NAS Unemployment Fund. So I think that the government can come and shed some light on where they are with the recapitalization of the National Insurance Fund after the promised $180 million after COVID. Obviously, we know that with COVID, there was mass unemployment throughout the island, and so the fund pretty much depleted, but the government ensured that it would have been recapitalized over time. So it's like 4 years now. It's like 4 years since the first $50 million went in, but we do not know what is the status of the other $130 million that was promised. And again, this questions then the oversight and the reporting. So we are here talking about regulating or stronger regulation in the insurance sector. We have a National Insurance, a Social Security Service, and we do not get annual reports on a timely basis. So we have no look into what is happening with our funds. And these are direct funds that go in from workers in this country who have a right to understand what is happening year to year. The actual review of ending, I think 2023 is due, I think anything around, this should be due in this period. So we're waiting to see what the latest report will be as it relates to the pensions and performance of the funds. But we are looking now at the actual national insurance, and without having visibility into the fund, we have to ask the questions of the injection of the remaining $130 million in the National Insurance Unemployment Fund as promised by the government. Because, Mr. President, since 2018, there has been a lot of questions and a lot of doubts about our national insurance funds in general, our pension fund. We know that we lost $1.3 billion in debt restructuring. We know that the ability to access pension is now extended to age 67. We know that over the last year, there have been further debt restructuring in the debt to climate swaps, which we have lost another maybe $300 or $500 million with those exchanges from the National Insurance Fund, we are told. So a lot is happening with the national insurance, and I think we just need to have the information out there, and this information needs to come to light. And the only person that can provide this information is the government. It is their responsibility to do that, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we're told that this Resilience and Regeneration Fund will help mitigate and against natural disasters, help us to respond better. In other words, it is almost like an insurance policy where something happens and you have a pool of funds where persons can draw on. So government has also said that they're going to use the dormant accounts that are going to be held at the central bank. At December, that dormant accounts at the central bank at December 2024 totaled $57.7 million. I'm not sure how much of that is accessible to be transferred to the fund, but it's millions of dollars that will be going into the fund. And then the new tax of 0.5% of all employees paying national insurance, 0.25% contributed from the employee and another 0.25% from employers. And that is on your gross earnings. That is not capped at the ceiling. So it is significantly different to how deductions are treated from the national insurance out of your pay. So collectively, I'm raising it because collectively, the government is probably going to capitalize or inject close to $100 million in the first instance into this fund. And then on an annual basis, you can probably see anywhere between $50 to $70 million going into the fund. But this levy, the question I have is this resilience and regeneration fund, this 0.5% that is coming from your effort as an employee and your contribution as an employer combined. It is really, I think we should call it what it is. It is really a levy or a tax. It is similar to what the government instituted back in 2018 with the health levy, where funds come in from workers through the national insurance and is transferred to the Queen's Elizabeth Hospital on an annual basis. So, in other words, unlike other funds within the National Insurance Service, I can make a claim on what I have put in. In this fund, I cannot directly make a claim on what I have put in, but I am contributing every day. So it is more like a levy and not like a fund that is shared based on persons that are contributing to the fund that get a direct benefit. And what is more puzzling is that you have a minister of this government who is on record saying that bailouts on the scale of Elsa and Barrow are unlikely to happen again. So the government has been putting systems in place to draw monies from your wages and your salaries and draw money from your employer's salaries to use money in dormant accounts and to use money from the central government to capitalize and put money in a fund, but yet we can expect that there will be no bailouts of the scale in Elsa and Barrow to Barbadians in the case of a natural disaster. We are left confused as to, on one hand, the government is saying you have to contribute, you are forced to contribute because it's not optional if you're working. You are forced to contribute on one hand, but on the other hand, it is very unlikely for you to benefit from what is happening, what is going into the fund. And while the government boasts about the natural disaster clauses in debt management, which will delay payments of their loans and their debts, government is also receiving significant monies, $50 to $70 million a year in this fund, but we are being told that it is very unlikely that we will be supported in a meaningful way in the case of a disaster. And I think that is grossly unfair, Mr. President. So the government is really taxing persons again. It's a new tax. They pass it on as a resilience fund, but it's really a new tax so that they can do what they want with the money, Mr. President. So we have to be very careful about the use of funds, and we think we need to bring legislation for us to govern this resilience and regeneration fund so that we can manage, so the resources of those funds are managed in the best interest of all Barbadians, especially those who are contributing to the fund. The catastrophe fund, I think back in 2021, I think the latest information on the central bank, on the National Insurance Service website, I think it had $67 million in assets. I don't know, based on the natural disasters or the drawdowns over the last 2 years, how much money is in the catastrophe fund. But again, this is the transparency that Barbados wants. Barbados wants to be able to know what is happening at these levels with the funds that they have committed at the disposal of the government directly through their wages. So, Mr. President, the last thing I would touch on is And I wouldn't be long with this for sure, but we're talking about insurance and resilience and being able to take care of ourselves during a natural disaster. But yet the government continues to use the natural events as an excuse why they should not govern or why they have not done things in this country. And they use COVID, ashfall and Hurricane Elsa, and Hurricane Beryl as excuses why they have not done other things. They say, even today, the leader of government business said that they made no money in COVID. Mr. President, during COVID, the government made $2.5 billion in revenue, based on the central bank reports. And that $2.5 billion is actually more than the annual average of the previous government. Mr. President, during the ashfall and Hurricane Elsa in 2021, there was a 10% increase in overall revenue, Mr. President, for this government. Personal income tax grew, which means that taxpayers, consumers, workers in this country are contributing more to the purse of the government. The VAT grew as well, Mr. President. Fuel tax earnings grew, Mr. President. Foreign exchange earnings grew, Mr. President. But yet, this government is always using these disasters as a scapegoat on why they have not done certain things in this country. During Hurricane Beryl last year, Mr. President, when we saw the demise of the fishing industry because of lack of insurance from those persons involved, those small businesses involved, government revenues increased by 17% over the previous year. So I'm saying to you, Mr. President, again, income tax was up, corporation tax was up, VAT was up, excise taxes was up, import taxes were up, fuel tax was up. I'm saying, Mr. President, that the government has no excuse that to start to take care of the persons who are contributing to the public purse, who has put money into the personal purse, Mr. President, and they must not use these disasters as a cop-out to dealing with the issues of this country, because they were well serviced, as I said, especially by income taxes. Where workers were working from home, where workers still contributed, and now they're drawing more from your salary with this Resilience and Regeneration Fund. And on the other hand, they're telling you that it is unlikely that you will benefit in a significant way from your contribution. So, Mr. President, we support the whole notion of strengthening the Insurance Act. We understand that persons and investors need protection and deserve protection, but there are broader issues and implications of insurance in this country. The cost of insurance to households normally. You can imagine that a household in this country, a family in this country could probably pay between $75,000 to $100,000 in insurance over the life of a mortgage. It is a significant amount of money, right? You know that people complain a lot about the cost of vehicle insurance, although that may come down from year after year, depending on if your claims discount and all that. But the point I'm making, sir, is that the government is strong on resilience talk. It is time to get strong on resilience action to the benefit of the people. And with those few words, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. If there are no speakers, Senator Cummins, please wrap up. If you speak, you have to raise it. You can't read mine. Senator.
Apologies, Mr. President. Thank you so much. First thing first, it would be remiss of me if I didn't congratulate my former schoolmate, Honorable Chad Blackman, on his ascension to the Lower House. And I would like to join Senator Cummins in wishing Senator Malu all the best. Sad news to hear, and I hope that he recovers swiftly. Unlike the previous speaker from the opposition, I tend to be very much a glass three-quarter full person. And I see this amendment as an exciting opportunity, philosophically and strategically, in where the future of Barbados can go. We're in a moment in time where you have an unprecedented shift in terms of technologies. Everything is changing, right, around us, whether it's AI technology, whether it's blockchain technology, where you are able to do things in a way that perhaps even 2-3 years ago you couldn't possibly imagine. And nothing more is being affected than that than the financial industries, quite frankly. The rate and scale of our ability to move money, to provide services, to protect or even defraud, quite frankly, citizens and businesses has grown at an exponential rate. I was looking at a statistic in preparing for this that, in fact, brand new technology, I mean, many here have perhaps not heard of it, stablecoins. Stablecoins is a financial instrument and really a technological instrument that allows you to move foreign exchange across borders. Last year, $27.6 trillion, 12 zeros, was moved using stablecoins, which is more money than Visa and MasterCard combined moved in the year. This extraordinary advancements in the tools that are available to innovators, the companies all over the world, using new technologies to create this move forward rapidly. So to have legislation or regulation that doesn't connect with where the world is, so have legislation and regulators who don't understand the range of possibilities for people who are doing things that are well-intended and pragmatic and solve everyday solutions for ordinary citizens and businesses and doing interesting things, and not arming them with the ability to do risk-based analysis and to know that you can't treat the way you treat a multi-billion-dollar multinational organization the same way that you treat something with new ideas and new energies that solve very specific niche problems, that you can't treat them the same way, opens up an opportunity for us, a disadvantage for us to be left behind. And so the thinking behind this amendment and the thinking behind a lot of what the things, quite frankly, I'm most excited about the government is doing at the moment is meeting the challenge and the opportunity where we see it. That the world is moving at an incredible rate. And you have two real concerns, quite frankly. How do you protect your citizens? How do you protect your businesses from risk? And do so in a way that allows you to take advantage of the opportunity and not be left behind. And there's a stack of disadvantages of being small, a ton of them, right? Small market, small population size, small resources, small budget, small land mass, a ton of them. But one of the things in my previous role as Chief of Staff that I really love the opportunity to zero in is the strategic advantage of our pen. That despite being small, our pen was the exact same size as a large country. That we had the ability to make decisions of our own steam, of our own merit, of our own thought, that's as powerful as large countries, and we do it over and over again. A beautiful example of that has always been the Bridgetown Initiative. Our initial steam, our initial thought, gathering together giants of the world to one space to anchor something that moved the world forward because of the power of our pen, because of the power of our thought. And I think this is fundamentally something that we have to take much more advantage of going forward. We have an ability to lean on the fact that we have been a space where we call it good regulation, but we like to say no to things. So Barbados is not a space where you see something being put forward and you think someone got bribed or someone got paid off. That's not the reputation that we have, and long may continue. But by the same token, there's an opportunity to convert that good standard in terms of reputation to use it as a competitive advantage. How can we frame good regulation with a level of nimbleness in operations and competitive thought in terms of technologies that's coming at us to move the economy forward and get to the next stage of development? Senator Cummins spoke about quite a deal about our position as a major power globally in captive markets. We rank number 7 in the world, number 3 in the Caribbean. And I'm excited by the potential of growth, but the question I keep asking the persons in this industry, yes, we rank number 7 and global business comes our way, but how many of our developers are creating interesting software platforms that is indigenous to Barbados and then can be scaled to the world for this market? How many of our data analysts coming from the university are creating interesting new models around that? Senator Walters talked about the fishing industry and the boats. How can we make it available for a new format of engagement with regulators for some smart kids out of university or wherever they may be to create a new type of insurance model for fishing industry that connects with what the local industry, holds near and dear, understands the different parameters of what makes it unique here, but then scale to the world and create global products and services. The way we do that is having a dynamic regulator who's not here just in the business of saying no, but assessing the opportunities, making judgments on the basis of risk, and allowing innovators to innovate. And the notion of introducing a risk-based assessment is exactly that. Now, I spent some time with the FSC and their officials. They're dynamic. They want to do interesting things, but they'll be the first to admit they don't understand all the range of technologies and things that people come to them with. From crypto-backed insurance to utilization of AI-driven models for health insurance, all range of things that are new to them. They want to have the opportunity not just to say no at the beginning, but to assess the risk, and on the basis of that, introduce new modalities to what Barbados can be. And that's exciting. Now, you do that on the basis of risk. You make an assessment of how many people those are going to affect, what is the benefits as a result of being hosted there, not only to citizens, but your reputation, and how can we then crowd in investment and opportunities for companies to set up shop here and not just benefit directly from the insurance or financial instruments, but also hiring lawyers, hiring accountants, hiring graphic designers, hiring personal fitness trainers, whatever the thing that these persons working in these new companies need to benefit on. How can you leverage regulations as a means for extraordinary competitive advantage and economic growth? That's the business that this is in. So I rise to support the bill, not in the specificity of just what it represents, but the philosophy of using our pen as a distinct advantage as a small country. That we have a clear opportunity to be a global hub for research and development. We have a clear opportunity to be a leader in digital finance. We have a clear opportunity to be a leader in impact innovation. And we have been doing that. Laws and adjustments to how we function, such as this, are fundamental to taking it to the next level and inciting a new path of development for the country. In this short statement, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator the Honorable Jonathan Reid. Any other speakers? Senator, the Honorable Dr. Chantal Mulroney.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, as I stand to support this bill. Mr. President, I believe that perhaps the Honourable Senator Walters was not in the chamber when we would have debated the Sustainable Fisheries Management Act. And in that debate, we would have provided an overview of the current state of the fishery sector, the support that is available to the fishery sectors for building resilience in the post-Beryl situation, and also the support that was being made available through government and other agencies, again, to help not only just recovery, but build capacity, and not even only directly within the fishery sector, but also as well in the associations that are part of that entire ecosystem. And Mr. President, I want to make sure that I keep my boat within the required waters and don't go into the deep blue with Senator Walters. But at the same time, if you would permit me, I may just have to refresh the memory for Senator Walters' sake and for the record too, in relation to the support, because I think when Senator Walters was speaking, he was a little bit fuzzy, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, he wasn't sure, Mr. President. So let me provide the necessary clarity and surety that was provided prior in relation to the support of the fishery sector. And I will bring my boat to shore, Mr. President, and wrap that up in the context of insurance. So I want to remind the chamber that, in fact, that when the government announced its initial support to the fishery sector in light of the devastation of Beryl, we initially announced that we would give support for the first 3 months initially. It was boat owners, $2,000 per month for 3 months. We then extended it to another 3 months, 6 months in total. 6 months in total, Mr. President. So far, at that time, and that was, I think it was just last month or so that we debated that, what is now the Act, the government would have spent $5.496 million. $5,496 million on those income support benefits for boat owners, captains, crews, and one-off payments to vendors. The government decided, Mr. President, as well, that we would also help repairs to boats, and to date, we have put $1.96 million on vessel repairs, allowing at that time, because there would have to be more now, 50 boats to be relaunched. 50 boats to be relaunched. A total, Mr. President, of some $4.56 million spent to help the ordinary fisher folk. And yes, people were thanking the government for the support. I also, as well, want to advise that the government engage the World Bank to provide a resilience building project, Mr. President. And not only the World Bank, but as well, Mr. President, it worked with the United Nations in collaboration with the government of Japan as well, to provide another USD $2.93 million in support. And that support, Mr. President, was specifically related to strengthening resilience of the fishery sector. It's going to be a one-year program. It will see investments in the upgrade of the Bridgetown Fisheries Complex. And I also want to note as well, Mr. President, for the record, that those upgrades have started, that the repair work for one in Oistins in the jetty, and perhaps the Honorable Senator Walters can perhaps convene his colleagues, including the representative for Christchurch South, to perhaps take a visit, because he doesn't normally go in that place. But perhaps if he would normally make himself available, if he would make himself available to the people of Christchurch South, he would then know what is happening, and that the fact that work has actually started on repairs in the Oistins jetty, as they have started as well in Bridgetown as well. Because that is exactly... perhaps I'm hearing if he would roll down his windows as he passes by, he would be able to see some of those repairs that are going on. Mr. President, the Honorable Senator Walters raised the issues. I am responding to the issues that was raised. So I don't worry, the boat will get hauled back in. You asked the questions, Mr. President, he did. And I am now indicating, and I will say that one-year program, as I said, will see investments already taking place in the Bridgetown Fisheries Complex. It will set aside the Barbados Fisheries Recovery Plan, equipping boats with modern technology, improving, Mr. President, I know I'm in the Blue Sea with Senator Walters, improving ice facilities as well. There you go. There you go as well. And also as well, providing support, as I said, for Bornufo. So, Mr. President, the suggestion, again, that the government is not doing what it should in order to build resilience within the fishery sector, Mr. President, is an unfortunate one. I also want to say, Mr. President, with respect to insurance.
What's the point of order, Senator Walters?
Mr. President, the Senator is misrepresenting what I said. I said the government has not used its resources to adequately support the fishing sector when compared to other sectors in the country. The Senator has assisted me in correcting the amount that the government has supported the fishing folk with. I was on the assumption that the government would have supported the fishing sector with an amount not exceeding 15% of what it gave to the hoteliers during COVID of $300 million. The Senator is now correcting me and saying that the government has only provided support of 2.5% of the $300 million that was supported that was given to the hoteliers during COVID for the tourism industry then. So I'm grateful for the clarification that, the fishing sector got significantly less support than the big hoteliers during COVID. Thank you, Mr. President.
Please continue, Senator Monroe Knight.
Mr. President, I will move on because those queries will be answered at a later date. And I also want to point out that the support was not only given by government to the fishery sector as well, but that it was also support given by the Barbados Red Cross as well, the World Food Program as well. So more money given to boat agents, directly to 130 fish vendors as well. We're also given each by the Red Cross $600 a month for 3 months, a total then of $234,000. And it was the government that mobilized this support, and also as well the other support from other international agencies as well to assist the fishery sector. But even in that discourse, Mr. President, there was a recognition that the fishery sector also as well needed to insure itself. And, Mr. President, I want to identify that the government is, in fact, assisting the fishery sector to be able to mobilize around support. I have been informed that just last week, there was a meeting with the president of the insurers here in Barbados to discuss an insurance framework for the fishery sector, and that next week as well, that there would be ongoing meetings in order to be able to facilitate. I am also as well informed that the government, recognizing that even outside of the fishery sector, that average Barbadians need to be able to be insured comprehensively against disasters, and that the level of concern about the cost of that insurance is such that the government itself is facilitating a meeting of the general insurance in Barbados in order then to look and see how we can create the facility. I also want to acknowledge, I hope that we can acknowledge, Mr. President, that government has to play a balancing act, again, as the state interfering in the insurance market. But even noting that, the government is still facilitating that dialogue. We are also saying as well, Mr. President, that because we know that insurance functions on the base of mass, that we have been calling for a regional framework, one, yes, for our fisher folk, but also a regional framework that will, again, allow our citizens to be able to access the insurance that they need. Even in a context, Mr. President, when globally you have international insurance firms that are retreating from high-risk areas, and that is not something that we can control, but certainly something that as much as we can as a government to be able to enter one to negotiate with those that are here on the behalf of the fisher folk, and then also on the behalf of ordinary Barbadians, that the government is seeking to do that. So that there is in no way that the government is retreating from its responsibility, retreating from the recognition of the importance of it, but also as well, we're also asking our citizens, also asking the fisher folk as well to be cognizant of their responsibility to be insured. And Mr. President, I don't think that that is an unreasonable ask. You're doing fishing, it's a business. You should want to be able to insure your assets against disasters, because it will become as much, Mr. President, as the government can do or will want to do, increasingly difficult to have the capital to be able to consistently pour into sectors when there is a disaster. So we have to be able to encourage our citizens. And so then rather a defensive approach, I think there needs to be a dialogue which encourages everybody to be insured. Even as I said before, as we try to deal with that issue of the high cost of insurance as well, that is affecting us all. I also want, Mr. President, to indicate that the hurricane plan for the fishery sector will be launched next week. There have been ongoing discussions with all of the stakeholders within the fishery sector. I am advised that the plan has to be modified, again, to take in some concerns because there have been wide stakeholder discussions around that hurricane plan. And therefore that hurricane plan, again, will be launched and will be modified. So, Mr. President, I hope that my vote, unlike that of the Honourable Senator Walters, did not stay out in the deep blue, but that I was able to connect with the topic that we are on, the bill that is before us in relation to insurance, and again to provide the clarity on the investment and the assistance that government has been and continues to do for the fishery sector to ensure that it builds the necessary resilience in there, and as well in respect of insurance for the fishery sector and for the ordinary Barbadians. I'm obliged, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Chantal Monroe-Knight. Senator Cummins, please line up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank the honourable members who have spoken, and I want to take a moment to just provide some additional clarity on a few issues that were raised. As I always do, I attempt to respond to queries that were raised. Mr. President, I believe that the Honourable Dr. Chantal Monroe-Knight has gone through in great detail the issues relating to the fisheries sector, and I want to take a moment just to pull from the publicly available information on the website of the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited, which is the entity that took responsibility for administering the BEST program. The BEST program is the money that was allocated, $300 million during the course of COVID, to account for a sector that generates the revenue to pay Barbados' bills and accounts for 40% of this country's workforce. And it is disingenuous and unfortunate to attempt to create any equivalence between 40% of the workforce of this country going a-begging completely over a period during COVID and a sector that is entirely differently structured. So I want to draw from the Enterprise Growth Fund where, in order to avoid the sensationalism and the misrepresentations that have continued to be perpetuated, can be found on record in publicly available information. The BEST program was designed to respond to the tourism sector going underwater during COVID. The monies that were allocated combined both a grant component that was capped, and that grant was not for the purpose of going to profit for hoteliers, to support hoteliers in their private lives. It was tied specifically to them agreeing to retain a minimum of 75% of their workforce, to keep housekeepers, gardeners, cooks, maintenance persons, pool persons on staff so that they would have 80% of their wages or salaries during the period of COVID. It was not a grant to go to hoteliers. It continues to be a misrepresentation of the facts. 1. 2, Mr. President, if during that period the hotel did not have guests to come and to be able to stay in your hotel, the requirement was for those workers, 75% of the total workforce of a given hotel at 80% of their salary or wages, they were required to be enrolled in a training program. That training program covered a range of institutions, including but not limited to the National Transformation Initiative. So workers had the opportunity and were required by the BEST program to be upskilled, to be retooled, and to be trained in preparation for the reopening of the sector that pays this country's bills, that allows this country, when it makes money, to do things like support the fishery sector. Now, in addition, there was an investment component, Mr. President. There was an investment component that then required that then required the hotel sector to take out what we call preference shares. The government took out preference shares, and it had a coupon, and the coupon was on a sliding scale. And the percentages are publicly available up to 2%, no different than the 2.5% that was just bandied about in a different context. And that coupon then required the hoteliers to make payments, and then the government took out a share of the facility and investment. And in the event that tourism recovered to 2019 levels, which was the baseline threshold, there was an opportunity for either the hoteliers to buy out the shares that the government had taken, or the government and they had to fight the right of what we call first refusal. It was a structured program that was not a grant. It was not a giveaway. They were insured, all of them, 100%. They also were required to do 3 additional things, Mr. President. This House, earlier today, I laid a document in this honorable chamber called the Tourism Linkages Policy. If you look at Jamaica, Jamaica has a similar policy as well. Jamaica pioneered it, Tourism Linkages Policy, and it connects the tourism sector to agriculture, to manufacturing, and to the services sector. During COVID, there was a requirement for those companies that were involved in the tourism sector and involved and enrolled in the BEST program, Mr. President, to then make investments in a couple of things. We talked about stormwater earlier, sewage treatment and waste removal, green energy investments, upskilling and retraining by use of digitalization. Those were requirements as a part of the investment component of the program and the project, so that on the west coast of this country, Mr. President, on the south coast of this country, Mr. President, hotel infrastructure would have sewage and waste disposal systems inbuilt into their transformation projects, in their infrastructure, to protect our coastlines and to protect our people. These are the things that were embedded in the BEST program. It can be sensationalized, but facts must always be still seen as facts, Mr. President. Now, I understand that the honorable member may be a little bruised. He's worked hard recently and lost resoundingly, and so he may want to come and see how much mud he can throw and see how much of it may stick. I understand he may feel a low way that he doesn't have anybody to talk about taking chicken off of their plates when they're at lunch. I understand that, Mr. President. But when you come to the people of Barbados in this honorable chamber, honor it and speak truth, because the truth is publicly available. The final thing that I want to say here, Mr. President, is that I read the same news report that the honorable member made reference to. I wasn't there, but I read the same news report, and I'm fairly certain that I saw in that news report that the minister who spoke said they encourage people who can afford to get insurance to get insurance. And they want to say that those funds are available for those who are the most vulnerable among us. That is what the Honorable Minister is quoted in the newspaper as saying. He went on to say there are those of us who can afford to get insurance and choose not to get insurance. But for those who can afford to do it so that just like so many of us pay to support free education and then choose to go overseas, pay through our taxation system to get free health care and chose to go to the private doctor. We are supporting the sense of community where we are providing, by way of the deductions that we refer to, support for those who cannot afford to get insurance coverage, and therefore they need the support of the state. It is the responsibility of the state to take care of the most vulnerable and those who cannot afford to do the things that others can. It is not the responsibility, however, of me to say, I don't want to pay the money for insurance. I don't want to get into all of them. I prefer to keep the money in my pocket and go and buy a pair of shoes instead, or go and do something else, but I want the government to pay for my house insurance, to pay for my car insurance. You cannot have an asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and not be able to have a genuine conversation about insurance affordability. It is not a reasonable ask for me to ask that of the government, and that is what I read as the Honorable Minister who spoke in that press conference to be saying. And if it is that the representative who sits in this chamber as a member of the opposition is saying that we should not be looking after the most vulnerable, then it means that they're definitely not going to apologize anytime soon for withdrawing things like public access to university education in this country, because they do not believe in looking after the most vulnerable. They genuinely don't believe in it. They do not believe that the state has a responsibility to look after its people who cannot afford to look after themselves. If that is what they're saying in here, then do not look for any apology anytime soon from the Democratic Labour Party. Now, Mr. President, I started my presentation today in peace. I closed it in peace, and I did not pick a noise. I did not. You weren't even in the chamber when I was speaking on insurance. I spoke on insurance today very peacefully. I came and I made sure and I talked about the risk-based approach. But when you come now to pitch a boat out to sea, then regrettably, you force me to draw you back into shore. So I want to commend this bill on insurance to this honorable chamber, and I want to thank the members who have spoken, including those who have spoken in a different way that gave me the opportunity to correct for the record in a way that I may not have had an opportunity to do on a previous occasion. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair, and the Honorable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honorable the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Deputy Chair, may I take the bill in two parts?
Indeed you may.
Clauses 1 to 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 1 through 6 do not stand part.
Question is that clauses 1 through 6 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. And those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clauses 7 through 12.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 7 through 12 do not stand part.
The question is that clauses 7 through 12 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the pass of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Insurance Amendment Act of 2025.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Insurance Amendment Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, this brings us to the end of government business for the day. I want to thank all honorable members for their continued commitment to the work of the Senate, and I beg to move that the Senate now is adjourned sine die.
The question is that the Honorable Senate be now adjourned sine die. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senate stands adjourned sine die.